everybody, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, we have Steve Edwards.
To borrow from AJ, yo, coming at you from a cloudy and cool Portland after having been in Arizona, sunny and warm last week.
Right. I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. Yeah, it was rainy last week here, but looks like it's going to be a nice day today. So we have a special guest this week. We have Santosh. I don't know if we have your last name anywhere where I can see it. You want to introduce yourself and let people know who you are and why we're excited to have you here?
My name is Santosh, and I live in Germany. So I live near Hamburg. I keep telling people that I live in Hamburg, but it's a lie because that's the nearest city. So
Yeah.
people only know Hamburg. So and I work for a company called Celonis. So I'm a senior software engineer at Celonis, and I'm involved in multiple communities. So I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. I'm also a GitHub star, and I'm also part of Linux Champions program, which is program Linux. And I'm also co-founder for a community. So we run a community called This Is Learning, and this is Tech Talks, a podcast which we do generally. We have been doing it for quite a year now, and that's what I do. And you might have seen me probably active on Twitter or LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm just too much active there.
Very cool. Well, the topic I have in front of us, and this might be a little provocative for some people, is why Angular is the best framework for you. And I think just to get us started, it seems like React is kind of the one that far and away people are adopting. And so I guess what I'm asking is, are you putting forward that that's a mistake or just not as good a decision as you could make if you go for Angular?
I'm just here to share my point of view why Angular is best for you.
Okay.
But yeah, people might differ. I mean, generally it's like up to you, like you to decide what is best for you. But
Okay. So why should people use Angular then? Because I know Steve does Vue, just to give a little background, and I've done. I've kind of played with them all, and I've mostly settled on Stimulus, which isn't a surprise if you're into Ruby on Rails. So, yeah, you might get a little pushback here or there because neither of us use Angular on a regular basis.
For what it's worth, I'll throw in this caveat that I did start out with Angular, but it's what is now Angular JS, Angular 1, whatever you want to call the first version. So I switched over to Vue at the time that it was rewritten into Angular 2, and on for various reasons, that we can discuss. But so Angular was my my initial step into JavaScript coding on the front end.
Most people, because it was one of the earliest frameworks, right? I mean, it came even before React. So most of the people were doing AngularJS, and then Angular 2 came in, which is the current Angular, which we are going to talk about. AngularJS is now released end of life, so it's not even supported by Angular officially. But I think there are a few companies who are supporting long-term support, but that's another thing. So it's started around Angular 2 when people started moving away from AngularJS to other frameworks. I mean, that was, I would say, that was a very hard time, even for the framework, because there are multiple things, right? When Angular 2 came, Angular team said they are going to rewrite it in TypeScript, and not many people were fan of TypeScript. So if you all remember, TypeScript, Angular was the first framework to actually bet on TypeScript. They said, they will rewrite everything in TypeScript, and then Microsoft got a good backing. They even wrote a blog post 3 years ago that Google team, our Angular team, was a big support behind the success of TypeScript early, because no one was trying to adopt it, but they did. They wrote a big enterprise framework using TypeScript, and it's being used now by millions of developers. So that was the early start. And of course, there was no path. I mean, the another issue was AngularJS to Angular 2. Okay, there was no migration path, so everyone was scared. What happens tomorrow, right? I mean, if once AngularJS is officially dead, how we'll be able to migrate to Angular or the new version? And there was no clear path. Of course, now there is a guide. There is a guide how you can migrate your AngularJS app to Angular app, and it's available now. But that was the time. Actually, there were some bad decisions, I would say, which caused like big panic in the community when the people who were using Angular JS basically.
Yeah, I remember we were talking to. So I was one of the people that started and hosted for a long time the Adventures in Angular podcast.
That was your first Angular podcast I ever started listening to, Chuck, was Adventures in Angular.
Okay. Yeah, and so we were talking to Mishko and a bunch of the other people that were involved in a lot of that. And yeah, there was a lot of anxiety at the time over, where Angular was going to end up. And yeah, they made the cut over to TypeScript. Initially, they were trying to come up with their own script that, transpiled to JavaScript that was similar to TypeScript. And I guess they got what they wanted from the TypeScript team and made that transition. But yeah, so at this point, yeah, Angular is much more modern. It has a lot of other things going for it. But yeah, anyway, it was just an interesting time to be involved in that. So
it was like same time I started like doing AngularJS around 2015. I mean, I was late into the ecosystem, of course, and then 2017, I think Angular 4 came. That's when I picked it up. So of course, I was lucky not to get into Angular 2. I know a lot of people were actually frustrated with every like breaking changes with a new RC and everything. I just keep hearing the story, and then it makes it like, oh, well, glad I decided not to jump right into it, like when Angular 2 was going on.
So what is it about Angular that you think makes it a great choice?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things, right? I mean, first of course, the current state of Angular. So if you see, like, of course, there was a time when people thought, okay, Angular is going to be dead. Angular is not moving forward. Like, there are no new features. Even like there are not. I mean, even they are not listening to the community. I mean, if you go to the open issues, there were like two top most voted issues which were still open for after 4 years, and everyone was frustrated. Even the community was like bit of anxious again that what's going to happen. And then came Angular 14. So Angular 14 is where all this new features, or the team actually started pushing so many new things. And I think we keep hearing about Angular Renaissance, right? And that's what happened. So after Angular 14, Angular started moving into different direction. They started listening to the community. So most of the like top voted features are actually fixed now. I mean, they're already being used by people. And I would say the kind of shift which Angular has taken, for example, Angular modules, like there was a time that everyone who was actually teaching Angular or learning Angular, they had to actually go ahead and learn about Angular modules. Like what are modules? And now after Angular 14, team decided to actually remove it. Like they said, okay, let's make it optional. So they started removing the headaches, or I would say the most important, not most important, but I would say most complicated things, like which you need to understand before jumping into Angular. They started removing those blockers. For example, they made Angular modules optional. Okay, they started making some changes to adopt to more functional programming. For example, not everyone is more comfortable writing classes in TypeScript. So, for example, Angular guards, they used to be all classes. Now they are functions, which enabled, like, there are a few changes, or there are new functions which enabled some of the library authors to actually adopt functional approach. One of the libraries, I think Max, you may know, is NGRX, which is for state management. So
NGRX,
they started, So they started moving most of the code to functional approach to make it like more tree-checkable, more easy to write. So apart from that, of course, now let's talk about SSR. There was like long period of time where Angular's team said, okay, they are not going to do SSR, right? I mean, they are not going to support SSR, and then community came and wrote Angular Universal.
Yep.
So Angular Universal was something which was driving SSR for a longer period of time. Now, Angular team has actually adopted that Angular Universal as part of the Angular package itself. It's called Angular SSR now. And the team is focusing more on SSR. So they're trying to give better experience when you are using SSR. So partial iteration is there. And now they are trying to merge Angular with another framework called Viz, which was actually an internal framework within Google. So it's like, this is just announced at NGConf this year that they are going to do it to make SSR more better with Angular. So they have partial iteration. And of course, there will be like more granular label change detection, which is also coming within Angular. So those are the things which makes, I would say, Angular as best framework for you right now, because they are actually adopting new features, making learning framework more easy to you. Like they are removing all the complicated things, more complicated concepts. Yeah, we can talk about more.
Yeah, it's funny because you're talking about a lot of these things. I mean, I remember when NGRX came out. I remember when Angular Universal came out. We're talking to the guys behind all that work. And yeah, it seems like a lot of these things, though, anymore, just kind of on par with what people expect from a modern framework, right? I mean, Vue has a lot of these same kinds of options, don't they, Steve? They have Vuex and Vue. I don't know how you do SSR with Vue, but
yeah, there's Next. I mean, you have the like Next or Next. I believe Angular has a meta framework, quote unquote, don't they? What is it called?
Scully.
No, it's analog now. So I think Scully has been. I don't know. I haven't heard anything from Scully.
That's true. Brandon's been working on analog, hasn't he?
Yeah. So analog is the meta framework, which is available.
So let me ask you one question. One of the, like I said, apologize, I haven't really worked in Angular 2X on. One of the features that Vue has that I consistently hear from people who have moved to Vue from Angular or React or, your framework of choice is the single file templates component functionality. In that, basically you have your template function. Same with Vue 2 or Vue 3, where it's just straight HTML, right? You're not having to put backticks around thing to make sure your quotes are, just right so it can interpret it. It's just very easy to read, and then you plug in any of your attributes and your directives and classes and stuff as regular HTML, which makes it easier for a designer to work with. Now I'm reading the Angular docs, and I don't see that capability. I might be missing it because I haven't been studying. So how does Angular make the templating portion easy?
So if you go to Angular, of course, single file component is something which is not available in Angular, right? So Angular generally, whenever you start a new project using CLI, so you have to bootstrap and component. So you bootstrap and root component, and then within root component, you can render anything. And template is nothing but you can actually, there are two options. So you can create an HTML file and you can provide it to the component class that, okay, this is the template, and where you will have all the HTML files. Or you can just write it within the TypeScript file itself. So you have something called template as a string. So you can just say backticks, and then you can start writing your HTML. So it's different from others. Like for example, React has JSX, of course. Vue has .vue file, which is where you can write all the things. But Angular is like plain HTML. So you can just write HTML file and start writing your HTML up with the help of course, some of the template functionality which is provided by Angular. If you need SFC, you should give it a try to analog, because they are trying to fill in this gap. So they're trying to adopt all this features which is widely asked for by the developers who are coming from background of Vue, right? So they are thinking about, okay, where is the SFCs? So yes, it's available with analog. Just I think you can go ahead and try it out with the current release.
Now, with those templates, are you also able? How is CSS handled? Is that something that's in a separate file that you would import into your component then, or is that something that you can do like a style block or something like that inside of your component?
Both the options are available. If you want, you can do it in line with styles property. So you can just say, okay, this is styles, and then you can write your inline styles. Or if you want a CSS file to be a separate file, you can define it as a string, same as your HTML files, right? So you can create an CSS file or SAS file, whatever you're using. Angular supports everything. So you can just create that file and just give a path. So it will just work.
But it's a separate file outside of your component. Is that right?
You can do both. I mean, you can do like within your TypeScript file, you can say styles, and then you can start writing in a string.
But it's a string with backticks around it, type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can the CSS be scoped to a particular component, or is it always necessarily global?
No. So good thing about Angular, it's by default. So whenever you create a new component, like it's scoped to the current component. So whenever you like create a new Angular application and you run it and you try to inspect any component and you see the style, so there you will find something called ng content appended with this. So it makes sure that your like style sheets are not leaking globally. You can also make it available globally. It's up to you. So it's like it gives you control to you. By default, it's of course wrapped inside the component, so it doesn't leak. But if you want to, you can just make it available everywhere. That's also possible. Basically, overriding global scope.
Now, how does Angular handle, or what are the options for state management? Is that something that's built in that comes by default? You know, Vue has Vuex. Actually, with Vue 3, it's Pinia now is the default state management tool for Vue 3. Is there like multiple options for options you want to use, or is there a default that's built into Angular, or at least maybe one that's recommended? How does that work?
Question, because this is where we can really talk about signals. Like signals are everywhere now. So Angular adopted signals few versions back. So Angular 16, they make it as an experimental. So the signals whole signals idea like came long back, but more people started adopting it after Solid.js came up with the solution, right? And now signals are adopted by Vue. It's adopted by Svelte and Angular as well. So one of the framework which adopted signals. So to make this state management easier, right? So earlier we had multiple options. So we had RxJS, which was where you can actually write your own. So if you want to create your own store, you can do it using RxJS. Then more people from the community, they created their own solution. As I was talking to Charles, and GRX was one of the early library, which is widely used. So it's like one out of 6 application in production uses NGRX. Then we have NGXS, which also is pretty good state management framework. And I think there are a few more which are I haven't used any other, but there are a few more which exist. But it comes, Angular wanted to make this state management thing easier, because why you should always reach out to state management library? Maybe sometime you don't need it, and that's why they introduced signals now. So if you want to make your state management easier, now you can actually start adopting signals as well. And signals can live anywhere. Like it can just live outside your file. Like for example, Steve, you said you are coming from Vue. You are already familiar with Pinia, which uses signals actually. In kind of signals. I mean, I don't know. Is it still using proxy, or it uses signals? But good thing out of this all new implementation which Angular did, signals are going to be part of JavaScript now. So it's actually being implemented as part of JavaScript specification. So now all frameworks have most of the frameworks have agreed that they need signals because they are using it. So Ryan Carniato from Solid.js, he was the main person behind driving all this, and soon it will be available in a browser. So that's the future. I think everyone will be using signals in future.
Everyone? That's a pretty big statement.
Because it's part of JavaScript specification, right? That's what. Because it's available in your browser now. So even though it's available to everyone, and I think most frameworks are already using it, apart from React, and unless they come up with some solution. But I think all the frameworks are actually already on signals, or give it and take, because if you see not React, but React already uses signals as well.
So all the cool kids are using signals, huh? Is that it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I've heard about it, and I know my buddy Eric Hanchett did a video with signals in Vue, and I'm not a big under the hood guy normally, but from reading about it, it's pretty similar to the proxies, if I'm understanding correctly, that Vue 3 uses for handling reactivity. Because you mentioned RxJS, and Chuck, to be honest, I always have flashbacks of some of the older podcasts with Ward and John where they were talking about RxJS, and they dived right in without explaining what observables were. And it took me a while to get my head around it. But are you basically saying that observables is state management? Because when I asked about state management, you brought up RxJS.
Yep. It was the solution for a long, long time. So because Angular had first-class support for RxJS, so everything was observable. For example, if I'm working with the router, so every event is nothing but an observable. If I'm working with HTTP, so it's nothing but an observable. So it was like they had like first-class support from day one, and that's why everyone started like building their solution around RxJS. So if you see NGRX, which I mentioned, it was nothing but like RxJS plus Redux pattern. And it was just wrapped around it. But now, as we have signals, so NGRX also came up with a new library called NGRX Signals, which is nothing but state management using signals.
So to the end developer, then, is the use of signals versus observables, is it pretty transparent, or is it a change that you have to make in your front end code and how you work with them?
Actually, it's a very good question, because right now community is very there are things which are very, very complicated. For example, RxJS had a pretty good use case, right? So wherever you have events, like where you want stream of data, you should go with RxJS, but most of the time you don't need it, right? On why you need a continuous stream of data in your front end. Of course, there are use cases, but not always. And that's where actually people wanted some easy solution, right? And the signals fills that gap. But now you have to move, like you have to change your mindset from using RxJS to signals. That's complicated because a lot of developers are still confused. Like, where should your data fetching go, right? You have to fetch the data at some point in time, right? And that's where things are like. I think this is something which will be easy, or not easy, but it will be easy to understand for the developers after some people or most of the enterprises start adopting signals, and they come up with the use cases where they needed signals and where they don't need it signals. Right now, it's like most of the team members from Angular team and the GD community and some of the people who have already worked on signals, they are trying to like teach people that how to use signals. But it's going to, the adoption part is going to take some time. Yeah, as you said, yes, there are people, like even I was confused, like why and where to use what. But I think after reading some of the blogs, after reading some of the after watching some of the videos around signals, it is becoming easier, or like easy to understand what where should I use signals and where I should use RxJS. It's not like RxJS is going to go away. As of today, like 100% of the code base uses RxJS. So just think about it, like removing the RxJS totally. It's not possible almost, right? So people have to think about, like, this is where I really like Angular, that you don't have to adopt like new feature fully. You don't have to replace your entire code base. Even for signals, it's like you can start writing your new code with signals, and you can keep your existing code as it is, and it will still work. And then if you want to adopt, you can do incremental migration for your existing code base, right? So that's a very good thing about. So you don't have, like, developers don't have to be like dual minded, like when they are adopting new features, that, okay, should I rewrite everything, migrate to signals, and then use RxJS? But that's not needed. So it will make your life a little bit easier if you are working on enterprise and you already have RxJS everywhere. I hope Steve, this answers your question.
Yeah, my understanding, I've never directly used observables myself with the observable pattern, but my understanding from having listened to podcasts or read about it is that you really have to adjust your code to using observables. It's not like just plug and play, right? You really got to rewrite your code in a different structure to use an observable versus not using it, for lack of a better term. So it would seem that moving from observables to signals would not be a minor undertaking.
No, it won't be. It won't be, for sure. If you're using NGRX, most people do, as I said, like 1 in 6 apps actually in Angular uses NGRX. So NGRX has some new functions which are available where you can, if you're receiving observables, you can just convert them to signals. So they have new functions available with the new releases. So it can make your life or migration a little bit easier. But if you have code base with RxJS, I would suggest don't go there like at the start. If you want to adopt signals, start adopting with new code which you will write, and then eventually once you have time, which is hard, right? I mean, which is hard because you have to show the value to your product team or to your company. That's why we are migrating to signals. So just hold on there, and once you get time and money and energy, then go ahead and start adopting signals. Good thing about Angular, as I said, like they always take care of developers as well. They focus more on developer experience. So they have been trying to provide new functions which can make your migrations much smoother. For example, in Angular, whenever you have to do input and output, right? So you have input decorator and output decorator. But now you have input and output as available as signals. So they are just function which gives you signals now. So of course, once you think that, okay, these are places where I don't need, and probably a stream or like just signals would be sufficient, you can just start replacing them with the new function. And there also a new Angular/RxJS interop library, which is created especially for interoperability between signals and RxJS, because it's not possible to just rewrite entire code, right? To make that migration smooth, they also have given some functions which are available as part of the framework itself.
I also having played with both, I found that, and I can't articulate what the difference is per se, but it feels like in some instances, the way that observables work and the way that, you kind of put a stream of data through it, and, it updates or transforms, depending on what you need, versus the way that signals work, where effectively you update a value and then anything that's subscribed to it gets the, gets the result. Some data and some UI seem to lend themselves better to one or the other. And so I also see that I think anybody who's thinking, I'm just going to migrate all of my observables to signals, you may be making things harder in some cases. You're definitely going to make things easier in other cases. But, I think there's going to be some version of kind of getting a good feel for where signals shine and where you may just want to keep doing things the way you're doing them.
By the way, Steve, just to mention, you said you never worked with observables. Observables are actually going to be part of JavaScript specification as well. They're already available. So they're behind a feature flag, but it's already available. So it will make probably, it will probably increase the adoption maybe for observables. And it will also make one thing really good, which is the RxJS library, right? So RxJS can just remove observables and just can be a place where you just have operators. So it will be like win-win for the community as well as the RxJS team who has been driving this library for a long time.
Yeah, we've had Ben on the show before to talk about RxJS.
Now, one of the things I wanted to go back to, one thing you'd mentioned earlier was regarding data fetching between observables and signals that being moved. I know, working in a huge Vue front-end enterprise application, Vuex is where we do a lot of our data fetching in order to keep the back end and the front end in sync. What are the issues with the data fetching that you mentioned earlier, whether it was a change or whether it was an issue and all? And it was just offhand, and I wanted to clarify that.
I mean, if you see, like, data fetching is always asynchronous, right? But signals are synchronous. So that's where you have to really like understand what you should be using there. And RxJS was a very good use case because you can just say, okay, it's an observable because it's a stream of data, and then you can just wrap it inside an observable and return the stream which is coming from your backend. But with signals, as it's an synchronous, it's if you try to directly take the data, like in Angular, we use something known as HTTP client service. So if you try to just wrap or take the data from HTTP client and assign it to signals, it will fail. It will fail because it's the asynchronous function, which is returning an object to a synchronous thing. So it won't be able to get the data. So that was where, of course, when I tried it, I was like really confused. What should I do here? And luckily, I was actually experimenting with NGRX. So NGRX can fill that gap for me. I don't have to like focus too much on that. And I just use the existing NGRX functionality and just use a new function which they have given. So it's called select signal. So there is a function called select signal, so which can wrap up or give your stream and convert it to a signal for you without doing anything. I mean, you don't have to do much. You just have to replace your functions, which was earlier observable, and just call dot select signal, and that's it. That's done. So that's one thing where like a lot of new developers who will start adopting signals will probably struggle with.
So, okay, let me make sure I understand this, because the issue is asynchronous is the way to do the data fetching, at least, where I'm used to, because you can load your page and not have to wait for a synchronous function. So are you saying that the NGRX wrapper around signals gives you the capability to asynchronous data fetching?
There's some, yeah, good.
Yeah, that was my question.
So NGRX has something called NGRX effects, which was made for actually all this asynchronous events or any functionality which has effects, right? Which causes an effect. So it was there from day one, and they made it like more better, like to support signals. So they just created this new select signal functionality, so you can just easily, as I said, like people who are using NGRX already, they will have like a very not much complicated time migrating to signals, but people who are just using plain RxJS, of course, the interop library which I mentioned available in Angular is there, which offers the functionality to convert signals to observable and observable to signal. Even I think NGRX is using that internally, but you still have to write some code.
So from a market standpoint, not sure if this is something you're aware of, where do you see Angular being used, ranging from the small one-off, hobby project up to enterprise applications? My perception, just from various data points that I've seen around the web, is that it tends to be more of an enterprise application tool as compared to a smaller hobbyist, one-off type of thing. For instance, my fire department uses an application and that we use for tracking all of our incidents and medical calls, and it's very large, and it's a company that that provides instances for different departments, and it's based on Angular. It's using Angular. You can tell by looking in the code, a lot of NG stuff. What's your perception of where this tool is used in that spectrum?
When you say Angular is used in enterprises, yes, it is, and this is where actually team wants to change the perspective now, right? Because for a longer period of time, I mean, people were thinking about, like, of course, React has Next, Vue has Next, so to do all this SSR, and it makes like very easy to play with like new frameworks. But when it comes to Angular, I mean, there was no clear way, right? I mean, there were like so many things which you have to learn. For example, RxJS, you have to learn about RxJS, you have to learn about change direction. And now, actually, Angular is trying to move over there. And the whole idea was, although the whole idea is actually to get more adoption to the new developers as well. That's the idea. So new developers can come easily and start playing around with AngularJS, right? Rather than focusing more on concepts like RxJS or observables or whatever you call, and even modules. So now I think more people have started talking about Angular because it's becoming like more easy for new developers. I would not say easy. Of course, there's nothing easy in actually programming. That's just a buzzword, but I would say as like Angular grows or the new feature comes in, and the less number of concepts which you have to learn about, it will grow in the adoption as well. And with introducing Signals, which is being adopted by many frameworks already, there are frameworks who are using it. I think it will only go in the right direction, and more people or more early stage companies will also adopt Angular, especially now the buzz around Angular plus Viz, which will make it a better framework. I think one of the best, I would say, when it comes to SSR, because Viz has been already being tested heavily within Google. They have been using it for a long time. Even Google search is driven by Viz. And once that functionality comes to Angular, I think there is no other framework which stands a chance, I would say. As I said, like I like hot text, and everyone loves hot text, right? So this is my hot take, that everyone will be doing Angular if they think about SSR.
Well, okay, I'll dispute that just based on my knowledge of other frameworks. I'm just curious, by way of a little background, and apologies if I missed this earlier. What's your experience in working with Vue or React or Svelte or some of the other frameworks as compared to Angular?
I started with AngularJS early, as I said, and then as I started learning React, and then as soon as I started writing JSX, I was like, okay, this is not the framework I want to learn. And then Vue felt like very similar to AngularJS, so I did something. But once I wrote TypeScript, right? So as I said, like in 2017, no one was doing TypeScript, and I started writing Angular because of TypeScript. It was not like I liked Angular and I started doing TypeScript because I was a .NET developer. So I came from a .NET background, all the types language, and I really like TypeScript. So I was like, okay, this is the framework which supports TypeScript. So I'm going to just do this. Of course, I learned Vue. I mean, when it was Vue 2, I think I did a little bit of Vue 3 as well, SFCs and all those things. But yeah, never worked on it. Mostly my work has been around AngularJS, and most of the time now I do NX Dev Tools. But
so, what are the things coming out next in Angular that you're excited about, or that people should know about?
Of course, one thing which was, as I said, like there are a few concepts which is hard to learn about, right? And one of them was change detection. So if you remember, like Charles, like early AngularJS 1 had one issue, right? Which was, of course, change detection. So it used to like do all these checks 10 times for no reason.
Right.
And then Angular T2 came, and team said, okay, we'll try to avoid all this loops which we used to run. But still, there was something known as change detection, and it used to like run in more faster way than the AngularJS.
Right.
But there was something called ng-zone. So we still have that, of course. So ng-zone was actually responsible for catching all the asynchronous events and then re-rendering everything, right? I mean, it's not basically re-rendering, it's just creating the proxy, not proxy, but it's actually rewriting whatever has been changed. And this was a big problem when it comes to enterprises, because as Steve also mentioned, like there is saying that Angular is already like always being preferred for enterprise application, which is true. But when your application grows a lot and this change detection like runs most of the times, your application becomes slow. So Angular also wanted to tackle this for a very long time. And there were like multiple discussion around it, how to do it, how to remove zone, and finally Signals came. As I said, like Signals is a big change because it is also going to change the way change detection works in Angular. So now the change detection can be granular. What I mean by granular is a component can have its own change detection. So you don't have to like run change detection on entire application. I can say, okay, if there is a component down the tree somewhere, and it can have just its own state using Signals. So now Signal is going to maintain that for us. And with Angular 18, that is already shipped. So now you can have change detection without ng-zone and at a granular level. It's not like going to impact your entire application. This is very important for me as well, because of course I work in enterprise, I have a very large application, and sometimes this causes an issue, like performance bottlenecks, and then you have to give show white screens to your end users, and no one likes white screens, right? I mean, I of course, as a user, if I'm using it, I will hate it, and that's going to be an amazing thing. But apart from this, like there are few features I will name, and for example, standalone components. So no modules are optional, and standalone APIs for example, like for HTTP, we had HTTP client, For router, we had router module. So all these are actually becoming nothing but functions. So they are like just a function which you can register and then use it. Signals, of course, and then you have, of course, with all the signals and RxJS thing, you also have interrupt functions. So it will make your migration smoother. And then granular level change detection. But best thing about Angular, which I like, is ng update. So if you have worked in Angular for some time, there's one thing which Angular team does. They never ship breaking change. What I mean by they never ship breaking change, of course, there are breaking changes which happens, but Angular team always ships a migration. So for example, if they're introducing a breaking change, they will also ship a migration script to you, which you can run and migrate your entire code base. And this is something which is tested like on the enterprise application. It's not something which is tested on your demo apps. It always works. Most of the developers out there who have been using Angular, they know that Angular is easy to migrate because of this migration functionality, which is provided out of the box. So if you go to enterprises, what they care about, like, of course, they want to make sure that the framework they are using is up to date, because there are companies which cannot tolerate vulnerabilities. And if your packages are old, of course, they will have vulnerabilities, right, at some point of the time. And Angular helps you in that as well, because they're offering this automatic migration. And this automatic migration is not only for enterprise applications. There are like millions of developers who are building libraries, who are shipping packages for Angular. It also works for them. So for example, if I'm maintaining a library, I can just run ng migrate, ng update, and then I can migrate my library to the next version and ship a new build to how many numbers of users I have. And that's an amazing thing, because this is something which not many frameworks offer in case they're moving ahead. So Angular team is making sure that they're moving ahead, but they're also making sure the developers who have been using your frameworks, they're also able to move ahead without like going into trouble. With this, the migration is cool, but only problem with migration is you may get stuck because not of Angular framework, but the third-party libraries. It's always like that, right? I mean, if you use Vue or React, it's always not React or Vue, but it's third-party libraries which you use, which causes issues sometimes. And the same applies for Angular. So you have to make sure that you have less number of third-party dependencies as much as you can. Of course, there are things which you cannot avoid, but try to trust on the libraries which are already, which are often updated, right? Because as I said, like, the migration path is very easy. You can just do ng update and then you are migrated to the next version, which is very good. And another thing is backward compatibility. So as I said, like, of course, we are going towards signals, we are going towards standalone components, we are going up towards standalone APIs, but you can still go ahead and write a code like with your existing code base and start adopting these new features, which is really cool about Angular, because you can just leave your old code base as it is. So you don't have to like rush into migration to adopt this new feature, and then you can just do this parallel. So start writing your like new code with signals or standalone component or with standalone APIs, and then start slowly migrating your previous code, which most of the developers needs, right? I mean, they don't want to actually rush and adopt new features because just they cannot do without them. For example, if I have to just like adopt signals into my whole code base first before adopting signals, it will make my life harder even. So those are few amazing things which are actually happening in Angular.
Very cool. Steve, did you have any other questions?
I guess I'm just curious about this migration tool, because I'm thinking, what exactly does this target? Because, I mean, you could have the same code written 50 different ways in 50 different applications, and trying to have a one-size-fits-all tool that's automatically going to migrate code seems like a whole different framework within itself. So I'm just curious as to what exactly does this migration tool that you're talking about update? Does it just look for certain code snippets that might be of an updated feature and try to convert it for you, or because I could just imagine something be rewritten and then breaking things, somewhere down the line. Obviously, you'd have like tests and, maybe TypeScript to catch certain things, but that's not going to catch everything. So what exactly does this migration tool do for you?
So as you said, like people can write the code into 50 different ways. That's not true for Angular. So Angular has like very good structure to write the code from day one. So if you follow those structure, for example, if you have a component class and then you follow the patterns which are actually provided by Angular, there are not 50 different ways to do this in Angular code base, basically. And that's where actually Angular, it also makes the life easier for Angular team because they know that, okay, this is the code which we have to migrate. For example, as I said, standalone component, right? So there is a migration which can convert your old code, which has Angular modules, to standalone, because we know that everyone was using module. There is no other way to do this. And that's where your migrations can just run and say, okay, this is the component, we need to convert it to standalone. Another thing. So if you are coming from Vue, right? So you have something called Vue for or something v for or v if, right? So those are
directives.
Directives, yes. Yeah. So we also had directives. So of course we have ng if, ng for, and now Angular is actually has adopted something called control flow syntax. So control flow syntax is something which just says @if and then @for, and then you can just write it without need for any extra wrapper, which is I think adopted from Svelte, if I'm not wrong. Svelte has something similar, and then to migrate, we know that, okay, there is something called ng if, ng for, which already exists. So Angular migration, what it does is it removes ng for, ng if with the new control flow syntax we have. And if I talk about, like, there is a new migration coming from HTTP client module. So everyone uses HTTP client module. There is no other way. So they know, like, okay, we have to just replace HTTP client module with the new functionality which we are offering. So this makes the life easier for many of the developers as well, because if I change a job, I know that this code going to be written in the same way as it was in my previous job. So that makes life easier for everyone, even including the library of authors, because they know that this is the only way where, like, in which my library will be used.
So in other words, the fact that Angular is very highly opinionated in structure is what makes it easy to do migration. That makes sense. I mean, I've seen, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, the hierarchy of opinionation factors amongst the different frameworks seems to range from React, which is very unopinionated, and there's, a bazillion different tools, whether it's routing or state or whatever, up to Vue, up to Angular, and then maybe even Ember, if I've understood, can be, more opinionated than Angular. I've heard that before. Does that sound fairly accurate?
Angular is opinionated for sure.
So
it's from the day one, I think. Because if you see, like, Angular has, there's no other way to do routing, right? I mean, of course, there was in Angular JSJs, and now there's just Angular router. So Angular provides router by default. Even for forms, Angular provides forms. Even as I said, like, for data fetching, Angular has something called HTTP already. So no one is doing actually data fetching using other libraries apart from HTTP. So that helps, as I said, as you also mentioned. So that those are the things which are very cool about Angular.
Sorry, what is the name of the library that does the data fetching you just mentioned?
Angular/common/HTTP.
Okay, is that its own thing from the ground up as compared to maybe like a wrapper around Axios or something like that?
Okay, so good question, because Angular had XML HTTP requests for a long time, so they had their wrapper based on it. But now most of the browser supports Fetch API.
Okay. So it's using native Fetch.
So now it's using native Fetch. So it's like it's not by default. You can enable it. So it's still like behind some feature. So let's say when you're using HTTP client, you have to just say use Fetch, and we'll start using Fetch.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
The default one remains XML HTTP request.
Yeah, I know for a while, Vue to compare has had Vue router. By default, that's maintained by the community. You had Vuex, which was maintained by the community, but you weren't required to use them. You had to opt in to use Vue router. You had to, you had to install it, and you had to configure your app to use it, which means that you can use other ones. Now, by default, it's much easier to use the one that's more commonly used and is maintained by the community, but you've always had that option to use other tools if for some reason you want to. Now, what about the last question I have? I know we're getting short on time here, Chuck, is one thing I don't see as much is wrappers for Angular with other tools. Case in point is Inertia.js, which is one of my favorites, and I've talked about quite a bit, which is basically a glue layer between your front end and your back end. Makes things incredibly fast, very easy to work with because you don't have to use your JavaScript router on the front end. You rely on your back end. You can plug it in with Node or Ruby or Laravel or so on, or other tools I like. Chuck, maybe you can tell me, Fred Shot, Astro. I don't know if they have an Angular plugin or not, but I don't see plugins for Angular as, with third-party integration tools like that as much as I do with React, Svelte, Vue. Do you see that changing in the future as Angular becomes more easy to use and more for the enterprise level? Or what do you think? Actually, I mean, all the cool kids are going to be using signals in Angular as I get it, from what you've been saying. So I'm just curious about that.
I found a Astro Angular.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Deal. Well, it's for analog.
Yeah.
So I would assume it works just with Angular, but
no, directly with Angular it doesn't work. So analog.js, analog has actually a plugin to work with Astro. Yeah, I mean this is where the meta frameworks can fill the gap still. So now, if let's say once Angular becomes less complicated, the thing is they have their own compiler, which makes things a little bit harder for everyone to adopt. But once that compiler becomes easy, I think more people will start adopting it. As of now, analog team figured it out how to do it. So they wrote their entire framework, meta framework, using Angular plus Unjs. I think I think Unjs is one they have used, if I'm not wrong. And Next also uses it, right? So they actually took the inspiration from Next team and just made this meta framework. So I think they are everyone is working together to get this done. And the only thing which is stopping most of the people is the way Angular compiler works. It's for a longer period of time, it was only Webpack. So it was just supporting Webpack. There was no other way to do it. Now it's adopting ES build. So now it actually uses ES build, and it also uses Vite. But let's say once in future, let's just think about. So once it starts supporting Vite for the production build as well, I think this is where it will become less complicated for the authors who are actually creating meta frameworks on top of it. So, but it will. I think I see a future where it will be possible, but not right now.
Anything else, Steve, before we jump into picks?
No, that's all I got.
All right. Well, do you want to start us off with the picks then?
Yes, we'll start with my picks, which are, Santosh, in case you weren't aware, the dad jokes of the week are the highlight of every episode. I just got to get them lined up here. I was so busy talking. Okay, so question. Let's see, where to go? Would it kill the maker of avocados to put a different toy inside? I mean, I already have 50 wooden balls already. The other night, my son, who's younger son, said, Dad, there's a monster under my bed. Can I sleep in your room? And I said, look, it's you he's after. Why make him my problem too? I was very sympathetic, as you can tell. And here's a question for you, Chuck, or Santosh. What was more important than the invention of the first telephone?
The invention of the second telephone?
Very good. Thank you. I'm impressed, Chuck. Without one phone, really nobody to talk to. One of the funniest sketches I ever heard is, if you remember Andy Rooney, Chuck, if you remember Andy Rooney, he used to do his little bits at the end of 60 Minutes. And he played a bit one time where they supposedly had the answer to the first call to Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, and it was, "I'm sorry, I'm not here to pick up the phone right now, but if we leave a message," you know,
right?
The answering machine to his first phone. It was great. Anyway, yeah, that's all I got for picks.
All right. Well, then I'll jump in with picks. Yeah, this last week I've mostly been doing the political stuff and not the board game stuff. So I'm going to pick 2 games that I've picked before that I played either with my family or my friends. The first one is, and this is one I've been playing with the family, it's called The Crew. And it's a card game. And you get assignments. There's a little logbook basically that tells you what to do. So it's like you have to get these 4 cards and you assign them out, to different people. And then, yeah. Anyway, it's really fun. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.95. And basically you just have to be old enough or mature enough in your thinking to figure out, okay, how do I play these cards so that the right person gets the right card? And it's very fun. We really, really like it. And so we're on there. I think there are 75 stages that you go through, right? And the first bunch, you just breeze through them, like the first 10 or 15, right? And so then they get progressively harder. So the last one, you have a way of communicating, and you couldn't use the communication option until the 3rd trick. And then there were 6 cards that had to be taken, and one of them was assigned to be taken first, and the other was assigned to be taken last. And it took us a bit of doing to get it with 5 people. So yeah, anyway, The Crew, it's way fun. The other one on Wednesday, me and my buddies got together and we played another round of Risk Legacy, which is also just, I grew up playing Risk, and so I kind of have this nostalgic love of the game. Risk Legacy is, if you've played any of the Legacy games, right? So the last game you played and the game before that all impact the current game. And anyway, it's been really, really fun. I don't.
How do you keep track of that?
So it has ways of doing that on the board, right? So we've played 4 rounds or 5 rounds. I think we've played 5 rounds now. I won the first 2, and so now everybody's gunning for me to make sure I don't win again. But I think one of my friends just won their either one of them won their first round or somebody just won their second round, because I was actually eliminated from the game. They wiped all of my guys off the board this time. It has a board game weight on Board Game Geek of 2.59. But it's been way fun. And then, like I said, I really love playing Risk. And so, yeah. So I'm going to pick those. And then, yeah, getting the page up for JavaScript Geniuses. You can find that at javascriptgeniuses.com. And yeah, I think those are all my picks. Santosh, what are your picks?
Okay, it can be anything, or
it can be anything. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we are like posting our next episode actually tomorrow on This is Tech Talks. So the new episode is with the Angular contributor. So in case you are looking forward to contribute to Angular, just go through the episode. And next one would be like I'll be there at Watercan Festival, which is a very big event here in Germany, which connects like a lot of open source contributors, open source companies, like or early stage companies. So just in case you are coming there, yeah, and you are from Germany, just let me know. We can meet probably.
Cool. And if people want to find you online, where are you usually at?
So my Twitter handle is Santosh Yadav Dev. I think it's there is some typo here, but it's Santosh Yadav Dev. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, both places with the same handle.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for coming. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Till next time, folks. Max out.
Adios.